Welcome in. This is Dumb Guy Loves Movies, and I am Mike Bassano, a dumb guy who loves movies. Today we're discussing Reservoir Dogs, 1992, written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, receiver of 0 Academy Award nominations, which is a tragedy. One of the greatest films ever made, especially considering the budget it was made with. Under $5 million. I think most of the budget went to Harvey Keitel. And it's written so brilliantly that not only is this a movie that stood the test of time, but this is a movie that every film buff, every cinema freak, all of us that are obsessed with movies, no matter how smart or dumb we might be, we love Reservoir Dogs. It's just that well done, that well written, that well directed, and that well acted. It's frankly one of those movies that people go into and they don't even have to know anything about it. They're going to love it. If you haven't seen Reservoir Dogs, it's on Amazon Prime right now for free. So, yeah, take advantage of that. I did. All right, now you shoot me in a dream, you better wake up and apologize. The first scene, sitting around having coffee at the diner. This is such an interesting way to start a movie because you never see anything like it, right? They're not talking about the plot. They're not talking about anything. They're just having conversations the way normal human beings have conversations. And this has been done since, but this was really this amazing moment in film where everybody is always trying to grab your attention, right? Think of the opening of any movie, especially before this. And everybody's always trying to have some big scene, some big moment to draw in the audience. This whole beginning, we have no idea who these people are. We don't know why they're together. We don't know the plot. It's all characterization. It's all building each character, right? Every single part of these conversations, which are just normal human conversations, they're all building characters. Well, first of all, Harvey Keitel, Mr. White, saying, if you shoot me in a dream, you better wake up and apologize, right? We already know a lot about him just from that one line in and of itself, the way he carries himself. Steve Buscemi, Mr. Pink, he doesn't tip. Doesn't want to tip. Now we know about him. He's kind of an asshole. We're aware, we're aware of his character, and that stays true throughout the film. And that's what's so interesting and I think brilliant about the beginning of this movie. We don't walk into this with some kind of understanding of what it's going to be about. Okay, we're going to have a heist. It's not going to go well. All this stuff. We don't know any of it. But we can't stop just sitting there and listening to these guys talk to each other. It's mesmerizing. Yeah, I mean, you just think about all the different things that go into there. It's all character development. Also, I think something that we don't talk about enough is that now, after seeing Reservoir Dogs, we all know that Like a Virgin is about huge dongs. Just about huge dicks. I had no idea. It's such an odd way to start a movie that I don't know that anybody had really seen before Reservoir Dogs in 1992, but it's something that we all talk about, right? We all talked about Madonna songs. We all talk about the meaning behind stuff and, what was Top Gun really about. It's Quentin Tarantino, man. The world's smallest violin, playing just for the waitresses. One of the many groups of people getting fucked over by the government. And I think that rings just as true today, if not even more true today, with everybody getting screwed by the government. And weirdly enough, more and more people in 2024 are becoming more like Mr. Pink, more like Steve Buscemi, not wanting to tip. Why doesn't their employer pay him a fair wage? Which, by the way, I think is a really good point. It's a really good point. By the way, happy Easter. Nothing says Easter like watching Reservoir Dogs, putting on the suit, and doing a podcast about it. This is the best use of my Easter I've ever had. Because you don't know what these guys are doing. They're having breakfast. They're all in suits. In this opening scene, we don't have a plot, but we want more of these guys. We want more of these characters, their interactions, the way that they talk to each other. That's what's so brilliant about that opening scene, and something people should be talking about for a very, very long time. And I think most people, when they start movies, when they start writing, when they start doing any kind of filmmaking, or even in my case, any kind of acting, you start to think about people like Quentin Tarantino, where they started, where they got to, and these little brilliant things like opening Reservoir Dogs with discussions unrelated to the plot. And that, I think that is partly what makes the scene after the opening credits with Tim Roth and Harvey Keitel in the car and Roth is shot. It makes it that much more jarring because we're getting thrown right into the teeth of it. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, okay, now we're going to watch them go up to this place, the jewelry store. We're going to watch them heist. They're going to see what happens. No, you go right from these guys are having a talk to these guys are having that iconic walk, right? And then bang, Tim Roth is shot. Harvey Keitel's telling him, you're not going to die. He's trying to talk him through it. And they're making a connection, which, of course, stays true throughout the entire film. They're making a connection in that moment with each other. And it's that much more jarring because of how it started. So with that setup, I couldn't have been more engaged. And the scene where Steve Buscemi is running from and shooting the cops, that brings us to the action. You know what I mean? Like we didn't. I never felt cheated that we didn't see the heist, and that's such a brilliant thing Tarantino does here. As an audience member, I don't feel like, oh man, why didn't I ever get to see the heist? Why didn't I get to see Michael Madsen, Mr. Blonde, blowing everybody away? I never think that because it brings us these little snippets of action and tells the story in such an interesting way. And Buscemi running from the cops, running into literally every person on the sidewalk, which is great. I love it. And then shooting at them and driving off, that brings us to the action. We get to see a little bit of what happened and the fallout from what went wrong inside the jewelry store without ever actually going inside the jewelry store. I love stuff like that, man. That gets me going because that's a storytelling mechanism that, it's so unique and it's so smart. And, getting to see that scene. And Steve Buscemi is just a great actor. There's a lot of great performances across the board in this, and we'll get to it. We have a lot of stuff to cover when it comes to Reservoir Dogs. A lot of stuff. Harvey Keitel, he tells Tim Roth his name. It's an awesome monologue, isn't it? He gets into it with Buscemi and all that stuff. Like there's a lot to let Keitel shine in this script. And I know that he was a big part of getting the movie made. That Quentin went to Harvey Keitel with the script and he wanted him to have this great part because having Harvey Keitel sign off on it was a big part of what was going to get the movie made, get the funds so that Reservoir Dogs could exist. And that's we'll talk about that a little bit at the end because it has nothing to do with the movie, but kind of how that whole thing shaped the future of cinema, which I don't know anybody that speaks poorly about Quentin Tarantino, at least not anybody that knows what the hell they're talking about. Everybody has dumb opinions. We're in the social media age where everybody's allowed to say the dumbest ass thing that comes to their mind. As someone who has a podcast named called Dumb Guy Loves Movies, I am sometimes in this category. I'm not above it, trust me. But for anybody who knows what they're talking about, which are people that I listen to, Quentin Tarantino is an amazing filmmaker. And what he did with this movie has created so much influence. And we'll get to that at the end of the episode. But this whole back and forth, we were set up. Oh my God, we're set up. Now we have kind of a plot, right? And I couldn't be more engaged. Now that we realize everything went wrong, they were set up. Who's the rat? Who do you think it is? Right? We don't know who it is yet, but everybody kind of has that thought of, well, who could it be? So now we have a plot. We have an objective for all the characters. And I'm so engaged in that moment when Buscemi just stands on business and says, I know it's not me. Who is it? And that got excited. And then, of course, Mr. Blonde shows up. Michael Madsen shows up, kind of break that standoff tension between Keitel and Buscemi, which is perfect timing, right? We have that intense moment where they're both pointing the gun at each other, and it looks like this thing's going to get even more bloody than it already is. Then in walks Michael Madsen, Mr. Blonde. And we have no idea what we're about to witness with that man. But it's such an interesting moment when he comes in and breaks that tension. And they immediately, Keitel doesn't like him, but Buscemi's like, hey, I know he's not the rat, because the rat wouldn't go around killing a bunch of people. You know, if he was working for the LAPD, he's not going to go around killing everybody. That was, Madsen was so perfectly cast in that role because he does have that fucking chaos in his eyes, right? Michael Madsen in that movie, you see it in his eyes. He's got that chaotic look. We don't know what he's going to do. He might fucking kill everybody. He might be the only guy walking out of this entire thing. But then he has those moments, right, where he seems so normal. And Buscemi even mentions that later on, right, where he's like, he seems fine now. Yeah, he seems good now. That's the perfect psychopath. The guy that seems like he's got it pretty well together, At times, when you see him, he looks smart. Doesn't look reactive at all. He's processing things. You never think this guy's going to cut someone's ear off. Never comes to your mind. But he has that chaos in his eyes, so you can kind of see it, right? I loved that casting with Madsen. Now, I also love that right after we meet Mr. Blonde and we hear about what he did at the jewelry store, we have that scene in Lawrence Tierney's office where Chris Penn and Michael Madsen, they're wrestling. And we kind of see how Mr. Blonde is human. We connect with him a little bit. This guy that just shot a bunch of people in the jewelry store that everyone says, oh, he just went absolutely crazy. But now we're watching him and I'm feeling connected to him. That's such an incredible moment and just great writing, great storytelling, because we've just found out, oh, this guy's psycho. He just started shooting people. And, the cops were there, but they weren't making a move until he started shooting people. So he's the catalyst for all the chaos that happened in that entire situation. He's Michael Madsen, Mr. Blonde, that son of a bitch. But then when we see him in Lawrence's office with Chris Penn, and they have this conversation about him doing the time. I guess that dock worker deal, which, by the way, is a pretty sweet deal. I think we all are like, oh, you mean you just get a paycheck? Don't have to show up. Watching him go through that, it creates a real character for us. Somebody that's not just the crazy guy who shot up a bunch of people in the jewelry store, right? Now he's this guy who makes a lot more sense to us. He's a person. He's been to prison. He's good with the back and forth with Chris Penn. That back and forth where they're wrestling and then they're talking shit to each other. That back and forth is so cool. Because, it's just two guys that you see a bond. And anytime you see that, it reminds me of you and your friends. Whether it was your friends in high school, your friends now, whatever. When you see that bond between Madsen and Penn, and then, of course, Dad yelling at him, right? Everybody relates to that. So I love the placement of that scene. So we really see something different after we hear about the atrocities of Mr. Blonde. Love that. Then when Michael Madsen gets left alone with the cop, it's funny. I think even the first time I saw this movie, and I've seen it a lot, but even the first time I saw Reservoir Dogs, the way they use sound when the door shuts and Madsen is left alone in the room with the cop. Chills. You just know, you get that feeling because of the way that I don't know if this was on purpose. I'm going to assume it was. I've talked about this before. Usually, if I feel something, I assume the filmmaker was making a choice to try to make me feel that way. So when that door shuts, it shuts and closes with just echo, this real authoritative boom shutting. That I think it's supposed to make the hair on my arm raise up and the goosebumps go and we get a little chill, like, oh shit. Now the guys who are sane have left. And we're left with Madsen, Mr. Blonde, and the cop that he put in his trunk. So you already kind of get that feeling. And I don't care who you are. If you have seen Reservoir Dogs, you can never hear Stuck in the Middle with You the same way ever again. It's not possible. Forever and always, when I hear Stuck in the Middle with You, here I am, I think of a man getting his ear cut off. That's it, man. It takes that song and removes it from whatever it was before you saw that movie, and it completely changes it for the rest of your life. And that's the sign of an incredible scene, a truly brilliant scene. A scene where it's so brutal and you're having this insane thing happen that makes you queasy, but you can't look away. You feel bad for the cop, but I don't know, I think they casted him well. He doesn't have a very likable face. Nash or whatever his name was, he doesn't have a very likable face. So I think that was smart, because even with all this stuff happening to him, I don't really feel that bad. He's kind of got a me face, where it's like, we don't mind. Yeah, so that is, I think, for everybody, a scene that changes that song forever. And I'll tell you this, I have seen Reservoir Dogs from the time I was a kid, probably 100 times. I don't know, ballparking it. I'm obsessive. I watch the same movies over and over again. I watch movies probably every day. I still, even rewatching it today right before doing this, I still forget Tim Roth is in that room until he shoots Michael Madsen. I still, to this day. And I don't know why. I think it's just great filmmaking. You get so sucked in to what's happening with Madsen and the cop that you just don't expect Tim Roth to shoot him. I forgot he was even there. Every time, man. And maybe I'm just dumb, right? Maybe I'm just somebody who is too dumb to remember everything about every movie, no matter how many times I've seen it. Or I just get too caught up in the moment, maybe. I don't know. But I always forget Tim Roth is there, and then bang, bang, bang. And I was like, oh, shit. God, what an incredible moment. Then he comes up with that story when they get back. Actually, even before that, before they get back, we have the big reveal, right? Tim Roth is the rat. And if you're like me, you always had that friend growing up. You always had that friend that said, I knew. I knew the whole time. Bullshit. Maybe you did. Maybe I'm just being sensitive. I thought it was Buscemi, right? The whole time. When the second they bring up the fact that there was somebody that was a rat, I immediately thought Buscemi. I thought Mr. Pink was the rat, because when you're just an asshole that's calling out everybody and you want to be at the forefront of the witch hunt, I always suspect that guy. The guy who's at the forefront of the witch hunt that wants to point the finger at everybody else, that's the guy who I think set everybody up. So the whole time I thought it's Buscemi. So when Tim Roth reveals that he's a cop, that's an incredibly intense moment. And it's a huge reveal. At least it was for me. And I think for most people watching it, a big reveal. And so I thought watching Tim Roth learn to be undercover, which is what we do right after he reveals that in the moment, right after killing Madsen, killing Mr. Blonde, we learn what Tim Roth went through to become a undercover cop. And I think that's a really cool moment and a cool piece of storytelling, because we get a background on these guys after we're thrown into the plot. So it all makes more sense that way. And when he first starts it, we get an acting lesson from Quentin Tarantino. Because Quentin Tarantino was an actor for 8 years before he started making his films. And he realized he was an actor that watched probably more films than a lot of other people, and he wanted to make his own. So when he first starts going through what it's like to be an undercover cop, and he tells him you have to be a great actor, he tells him to create the scene. You know, telling a story about the bathroom. You got to know what it smells like. Was there paper towels? Was it a hand dryer? You know, all those little details. That's an acting lesson. When you're in a scene, you have to imagine the setting. And if you're going to tell a story or even tell a joke, you have to imagine all of these things to make them real. And the more real they are to you, the more honest and truthful your performance is going to be. So we get a really cool acting lesson from Quentin Tarantino. And he's writing what he knows. 8 years as an actor. He's writing what he knows. I think that was, I really liked that scene. And then, buddy, I'm going to shoot you in the face. Every guy I know, growing up, if you say that line and they know what you're talking about, instant friends. Instant friends. You're hanging out, you're getting coffee, you're getting beers. If you say, buddy, I'm going to shoot you in the face with that big over-the-top delivery, oh, man. You're friends now. That's it. You're friends. That's from the bathroom scene, which is, of course, I think the story that Tim Roth had made up. And that moment is just, it's hilarious. It just really is. It's really funny. And that was one of those lines. And it's the same with when they start giving out the names later, right? And they start, and when they go back to when they all meet each other, and Lawrence Tierney's giving out the names, and he gives Steve Buscemi Mr. Pink, and he goes, well, why am I Mr. Pink? Why the fuck am I Mr. Pink? That's another one of those lines. Where if you say it that way, the way Buscemi said it, and somebody gets what you mean, boom, instant friends. You don't have to say Mr. Pink. Why the fuck am I anything? And you deliver it there, and then you respond with, why the fuck am I Mr. Pink? Boom. Friends. Instantly. That's the beauty of this. It's so well written, so much, like the whole way through, that there are so many lines from Reservoir Dogs. It became one of the most quotable movies of the 90s, at least, and probably one of the most quotable movies of all time. And now they come back. You know, the three of them come back. They find Tim Roth and the cop, shoot and kill the cop. Tim Roth gives his BS story, but it doesn't fit because Madsen, Mr. Blonde, had taken the 4-year hit, so they aren't buying the fact that he said, well, he was going to kill you guys and then run off with the diamonds. Doesn't make any sense, right? Kill you guys, run off with the diamonds. And now we got the standoff. Everybody's pointing guns at each other. And, you know, when that standoff happens, the climax, they all shoot each other. Everybody's going to die. Except for Steve Buscemi, of course. The asshole, Mr. Pink, looking out for number one, hiding. Very smart by him, by the way. Isn't that always the way it works, though? I love how he ends the movie that way, how Quentin decides to end it with Mr. Pink getting away with the diamonds. It's always the self-preserving piece of shit, isn't it? Who gets away with everything and walks off with no problems. It's always that guy. When they all shoot each other, and I'm always wondering, and I guess I'm always frustrated, not necessarily with the film itself, but just as somebody who's so immersed in the story, I'm like looking at Harvey Keitel, looking at Mr. White, going, why don't you just let him shoot him? You just met this guy. You're going to die over this guy? But that's Mr. White. From the very beginning, Mr. White's an integrity guy. From the very front, he's an integrity, and it drives me crazy because he didn't know that Tim Roth was undercover. Had he known, obviously he's going to let him shoot him. But he's an integrity guy, and he believed what he believed. And he believed that this guy is not an undercover cop. You can't shoot him. If you shoot him, I'm shooting you. And then, boom, they all go down. Buscemi makes off with the diamonds. That is such an interesting way to end it, because it really does show us full circle who Mr. White really is. When the chips are on the table and everything's going down, 99% of the people, myself included, are like, well, I don't know this guy. I'm not getting shot over him. Keitel gets shot over him. And then as he crawls over to Tim Roth, and Roth comes clean, tells him he's a cop. And we have that moment. Harvey Keitel staring at the cops as they bust into the door. And he's got the gun on Roth. If we don't see Roth, we don't see the cops, we only hear them. Bang. Keitel puts him down. And then the cops put Keitel down. Written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. Oh, man. Chills, right? It's a lot to process. That whole last 10 minutes of the movie is so much to process. And that's the brilliant part about Reservoir Dogs. We get to know these guys. We care about these guys. We hear their conversations. Quentin Tarantino goes blind and dies, after he wrecks the car. We see all these things happen to all these guys, and we kind of live through it with them. And then by the time it's over, it feels abrupt. It's not. Everyone's dead. There's no more story. Buscemi's gone. But it feels abrupt because we got so immersed in this story, and so immersed, I think, even more than the story, into the characters, right? Because the story is, guys go into heist. One of them's an undercover cop. It goes wrong, and then they try to figure out who's the rat, and everybody starts turning on each other. As a story, it's a good story, absolutely. But what makes it brilliant is the characters and how involved we become with these guys, how connected to these guys we feel. So when he shoots Roth and then the cops take out Keitel, that is such a huge turning point, and it feels abrupt because we're like, I wanted more time with these guys. But obviously that's not how it works, and that's why I think it's so interesting, because it's such an intense final 10 minutes that when it hits, boom, written and directed by Quentin Tarantino, I now have to sit there and try to process all the carnage that just happened while listening to Put the Lime in the Coconut and Drink It All Up. Right? I mean, when I hear Put the Lime in the Coconut, and I'm like, I'm still sitting there speechless. And I think that's how most people felt in the theater when this came out. You're sitting there speechless going, oh my God. And put the lime in the coconut and drink it all up. It's fantastic, man. Well, one thing I wanted to get to when it came to Harvey Keitel, and the way that Quentin Tarantino got this movie made, was to write a great part for Harvey Keitel. And then use him in the movie. That's going to get you funding, because Keitel, especially at that time, big-time star, right? Great actor, phenomenal actor. And getting him on board means funding for the movie. So that's become, with how influential Reservoir Dogs was across the board. One thing it did influence is I was watching an interview with Matt Damon, who wrote Good Will Hunting, with Ben Affleck. And he said that they were huge fans of Reservoir Dogs. And the part that they wrote of the therapist in Good Will Hunting, which of course went to Robin Williams, the late, great Robin Williams, that was they called it their Harvey Keitel role, because they said, in order to get this made, we need to have somebody who's a big star. And at that time, Matt Damon had done stuff. Ben Affleck had probably done more, thinking Mallrats, Dazed and Confused. Yeah, Ben Affleck had probably done a little more than him at that time. I don't know, I could be wrong. Dumb guy, loves movies. I'm imperfect. Some stuff I say, you're probably going to know that's not true. I'm doing the best I can. But they knew that they needed a big name, a guy that everybody knew, a household name, to get that movie made. And that was Robin Williams. So when they wrote the role of the therapist in Good Will Hunting, they were talking to each other for the whole 3 months saying, this is our Harvey Keitel role. like Reservoir Dogs, how Quentin got that made. We're doing the same thing. So with Reservoir Dogs, not only did that launch Quentin Tarantino's immaculate career, it helped a lot of other people understand how to get their movies made. So, huge influential movie, one of the greats of all time, and no better day than Easter Sunday to talk about Reservoir Dogs. Why not? Hey, my tie that looks like it should have been put out to pasture. I need to get another black tie. That's facts. But thank you so much for listening. That's Reservoir Dogs. This is Dumb Guy Who Loves Movies. Dumb Guy Loves Movies. I'm Michael Bassano, a dumb guy who loves movies. Thank you so much for going on this journey with me, and enjoy the rest of your day. And if you get a chance, Reservoir Dogs, Amazon Prime.